All right. Um, Welcome everyone. Uh, Welcome to the July edition of Agriculture 4.0 webinar. It's amazing having you on board to learn. And this time around, we are actually learning about drone sensors and insights, how we can actually unveil the power of data in agriculture. And but before we delve into the whole, matter for today, so let me introduce Vegetation Field Academy, and you know what we're doing already. Uh, it's to actually get you engaged and build your capacity for the future of agriculture. Yeah. So smart technologies in agriculture. So that's what we do with Agriculture 4.0. But Vegetation Field Academy, who are we? We are a like social enterprise, and we train and we build the capacity of young professionals in modern and emerging technologies for the future of work and for you to actually lead the precision agriculture. And what's actually our vision? Our vision is to create a world where every young person, regardless of your background, you have the opportunity to become a digital savvy farmer or agricultural professional driving sustainable and equitable growth in your communities through transformative power of technology. And that is why we are here today. And our mission is to actually reach the next gen farmers who are tech inclined and digitally savvy. Now, what's our methodology? Uh, we have three cardinal methodology, which is one, education and knowledge sharing. And also, this is where we have sections like this, knowledge sharing education, where we invite thought leaders, uh, with great experience on the field to bring us up to the latest technology and, you know, um, sharpen our skills when it comes to 21st century agriculture. And, uh, and the next, which is more like is training and skill development. So we provide you with training and skill development, to actually grow your capacity, your skill set, preparing you for the future of work and tech in agriculture. And the last is coaching and mentorship because we believe that you can actually get to where you're going or your destination if you actually have someone who can actually coach you, who can actually show you the way, hold your hand, and that is why we're here. And what are actually our core uh, skills that we're actually developing? One, of course, drone technology is one of them. Teaching you about drone technology, and that is why we have today drone sensors and insights. Okay, and secondly is geographic information systems and remote sensing applications, data science in agriculture, robotics and Internet of Things in agriculture. We also have we also have enterprise development, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and a lot more. Okay, so why do we do what we do, and what's our motivation? Uh, there is actually a skill gap to be closed. So young professionals like you need to build skills, both technical and enterprise skills, for you to actually be relevant and to stay relevant in the future of work in agriculture. Secondly, just observing the trend is never enough. Just knowing about the latest technology is not just enough. We as youth, we need to actually become enablers and players in the fourth agricultural revolution, and not just mere trend observers. And the third is that technology is key to unlock Africa's agricultural potential. This is why we're here, because we believe that technology is a leveler and it can actually change the game. Okay, and why should you join us? Okay, I haven't told you why we do what we do, then why should you consider joining us? Join us because we are creating the future we want in agriculture. Join us because we want to connect you to information and the world of opportunity. Scholarship, internship, volunteership, a lot of opportunities that can help you grow you connect you and move you close to your goal, to become a digital savvy and tech inclined farmer. Skill development through project collaboration, community interaction, and workshop. This is one thing we have in our community. It's a community of innovators. We have folks who are actually working on soil sensors, different innovations that is changing and will change the game in agriculture for our farmers and all agricultural stakeholders. At the end of the day, we can be able to have food security, access to coaching and mentorship. Yeah, from industry leaders and professionals. Mike is here with us all the way from Canada, and he's going to be teaching us on the topic of today. And trust me, this is actually one of the privileges you have when you join the community. And lastly, we are building a community of young, tech-inclined and digital savvy farmers and professionals. So therefore, join us. Thank you so much for actually joining today. So without further ado and without wasting much time, I would like uh, to bring up Mike. Mike has, yeah, I must tell you, the effort he has actually put into this preparation, the thought he has actually put. I'm amazed and I'm so honored to actually have him join us uh, this evening. It's actually morning at your hand, I guess. Uh, but we are actually very honored that you can actually wake up this early to actually impact knowledge to the next generation of farmers, of agricultural experts, agronomists, soil scientists, and all that, And trust me, this will never go in vain. You are actually impacting. So I will leave the floor to you, or for you, Mike. So yeah, that's
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Femi. I'm super excited to be here. I think what you guys are doing is really, really important. We have some organizations over here in North America that are doing the same thing, and I think, you know, it's efforts like with what you're putting on the table are really going to start driving precision agriculture, because we know that, as technology starts to advance, people start to leverage, the tools that they need right off the bat. So from my perspective, what I wanted to do is, when Femi reached out to me and asked me to join him on today's webinar, I thought about, the different pieces of information I could bring to the table to help guys and gals that are slowly starting to look at, moving into this space. So without any further ado, I'll sort of advance through my slide here. So on the call, what I thought would be a great flow for today's presentation would be to sort of give everyone a snapshot, from my perspective, of course, where the landscape of the agricultural space is right now in terms of technology and precision ag. And then I want to sort of walk everyone through the sensor lineup. And what I really mean is what types of imagery are being used on a daily basis in the precision ag space. And then I want to talk about a very important turning point in the industry. And it'll make more sense as I start diving through the information. And then I want to start talking about the actual services that anyone with a drone and access to this software that I'll be showing everyone today, with the combination of having a drone and access to these platforms, you can deliver a lot of real solid value to growers and farmers, right? So you don't have to, make big investments. You don't have to have the latest and greatest of technology. With today's presentation, in my hopes, is the biggest takeaway everyone's going to grab from today's presentation is you don't need the best of the best. What you have to focus on are the farmers' pain points in growing their crops, and how aerial imagery helps them with that process and workflow. So we'll go through that. I'll walk through some of the different ways that data can help growers make really critical decisions that really impact their harvest and their financial bottom line. And then we'll open it up to questions. So what I'll try and do is, it's 10 after the hour now. I'll try and get this done within like 35 minutes. And that way we'll have enough time for questions, because I'm sure there'll be some engaging questions as I get through to the software part, because that's where everyone really wants to look at it. Okay, so without any further ado, my background, it's a cheesy picture, I apologize, but so my background has been in software sales. So for my entire career, I worked for companies like Dell, SolarWinds, Enable Technologies, and companies that provided tools for either internal IT people or individual small companies called managed service providers that support small business networks. So when you're looking at that whole process, my whole role was to help them sort of deliver their services to market. But 5 years ago, it was good. I put 20 years into that industry and I was looking for a new career. And I started working in this space right now. So I had the luxury of working with a company called Solvi out of Sweden, which is a critical component of today's presentation because I'll be using their software to sort of deliver some of the value. And I worked with a lot of really strong and engaging companies in North America pushing the agricultural space forward. So with that combined knowledge and that history, I think I can, impart some knowledge for you guys on today's webinar. So I'll slide over to the next page. So from an industry landscape perspective, precision ag isn't really that old, right? So if we think about how 10 years ago, farmers and growers were thinking about, imagery, they were thinking of satellite imagery, right? So that's the first step of how the entire growing industry was introduced to precision ag, was based on satellite imagery. So who did that really benefit back in the day? Well, to the local small grower, not a lot of value, to be honest. But where this really was really impactful was for large commercial operations, for research ag, for companies that were developing new products like chemical companies and seed companies. This information was revolutionary and groundbreaking because it gave them a completely different vantage point on how they were observing their field trials and their mass production, right? So it was an easy way for them to streamline some of their workflows. But for the average grower who's growing maybe, under 500 acres of whatever crop, they don't get a lot of value out of imagery like this, right? Because number one, to understand this type of imagery, multispectral interpretations and heat maps and plant health maps, you sort of have to have an understanding of vegetation indices and how to use them to tease out the information you're looking for so these images make sense. So when you think of the way the industry's evolved, like in most industries, large corporations drive the research and development, right? And then the mid enterprise, and then the SMB, the small to mid-sized business sector, we get to reap the value and the benefits of what they've pioneered. And it's just the way it works in every single industry. The people with the deep pockets and the money, they fund the research. And then once that research hits the mainstream, everyone has access to that technology, right? So when we slide into the different types of, imagery, when you look at, like I said before, the companies that were, or the sectors of the industry is a better way of describing it. The sectors of the industry that were really driving the development of platforms like Solvi and Agrimo and Picks for Fields and all these wonderful platforms that just bring a lot of value to you guys on the ground. It wasn't us driving those features. It was large pharmaceutical companies that, were developing a new seed or a new chemical product, and they had 15,000 trial plots across 3 different continents, and they were managing that. So those companies and those PhDs and those research teams were the ones that were really driving the adoption of this technology, as well as requesting features. Because they, as they're going through their field trials, they would want to know, I want to have a count of this field trial we're doing, but I also want to know the size of every plant in that field trial. Well, companies like Solvi, Agrimo, and all these other companies like Pix, they jumped on, they started making those developments. So along with that workflow, when you're looking at the different types of sensors on the market, we know we have multispectral imagery. It has a lot of value and brings, a lot of detailed plant health and characteristics to the world, right? We have RGB imagery and we have thermal. Each one have a very specific place in the industry. Thermal is being used by a company called Farm Air out of Greece, a wonderful company that focuses exclusively on vineyards. And they leverage high resolution RGB and thermal as a means of teasing out a lot of really valuable information in vineyards. All the other companies like Solvi, Agrimo, Picks for Fields, they heavily focus on RGB and multispectral imagery. And those two data sets combined deliver a lot of value as well to row crops and all crops right across the board. But thermal aside, because there's very few applications for the production grower and for a drone service provider to deliver value based on that sensor. So thermal isn't really in the production side at our level in the SMB space, outside of using that one platform, Farm Air. But RGB imagery is a wonderful use of indicating where plants are stressed in the field. So the way it was described to me by a researcher is multispectral imagery, when applied and gone through the process of, layering upon layer, all the different vegetation indices that they're using that can be applied to multispectral data, you then tease out what the actual problems are. Whereas with RGB, what RGB does is you can apply not as many vegetation indices as you can to multispectral, but you can still apply a multitude of our vegetation indices to that imagery. And what RGB is great at is it's a phenomenal representation of chlorophyll content in biomass, right? So it can measure the reflectance values, and it can instantly tell you where plants are within the field that aren't doing so well or are unhealthy. And that works really well for the production farmer, right? So someone who has 10 acres to 500 hectares of X, that in and of itself is good enough information, because it saves them a lot of time, because you don't necessarily have to tell them here's the problem and here's what the actual cause and effect of that issue is. All we need to be able to do in the commercial environment for production ag is tell them where the problem is. They have agronomists and they have crop consultants on the ground that they liaison with that analyze those issues. But what we can do is we can save them a whole lot of time and walking and point them directly to where the issues are in the field. And in some of the data sets that I have in store for this presentation to walk you guys through, it'll be very obvious how the value is delivered. So again, if anyone is watching this webinar and they have a drone and they're thinking about getting into the ag space and capturing imagery, don't be held back because you don't have a multispectral sensor. You do not need a multispectral sensor for commercial ag. When you're dealing with the growers, if someone has an issue that, they have the wherewithal and the staff that understand that the multispectral imagery and how to apply the different vegetation indices, sure, but those are probably one out of every 30 or 40 growers. So again, if you're looking at getting into the space, don't see the hardware, or especially the multispectral sensor, as a barrier of entry, because that would be a shame for anyone sitting on the sidelines not diving in, because with just a really decent drone, like even an Air 2S, right, that you can capture great imagery with that, and you could provide a lot of value. So I won't belabor this anymore, but keep in mind, of the different types of imagery on the market, you don't have to have them all, right? Vegetation indices, like I just explained, each one is designed to extract a specific set of information, right? So what happens in the real world when people are conducting field trials, they're layering a lot of different vegetation indices on the imagery, and they're working to tease that information out. One thing to keep in mind is we don't have to really dive into that side of the business. Understand that, simply by showing people where the issues are in the field from a field scouting perspective, has a massive amount of value. One other key thing to keep in mind when we're looking at vegetation indices is not all VIs are based on plant health. A lot of VIs are based on soil health that measure the moisture in soil, the acidity of soil. So again, when you're looking at vegetation indices, I wouldn't look at that as a barrier, because we don't know a lot about them. I myself have a very limited understanding of a few of them, only because that was my workflow. And that's what I needed to understand. So I think from a vegetation indices standpoint, I wouldn't get hung up on, not knowing a lot about it. Understand that the platforms that processes this imagery leverage the vegetation indices in such a way that the layman could deliver value. So I wouldn't get hung up on that in any way or shape or form. The turning point from my perspective in the industry, and we go back to where the market landscape, who was driving the adoption of these types of technologies and services, was the big companies. One of the challenges that came out of that workflow is, insert whatever large pharmaceutical company we want to talk about that's developed seeds, products, or chemicals. They have a really good understanding of what features they're looking for. So they know exactly how to apply those features to the workflows that they're conducting. When we're looking at these technologies, the messaging hasn't caught up very well. And what I mean by the messaging hasn't caught up very well is, if all of us on the call today, went outside and we had a drum and we started knocking on growers' doors to market services, hey, I could do, what is it you're doing, right? That, from my perspective, is one of the biggest obstacles that a lot of fledgling drone service providers are encountering when they're looking at getting into the market, right? It's how to convey what the deliverable and the value is of the captured data, right? So what a lot of them end up focusing a lot of their time and effort on are plant health maps, those large maps that make sense to nobody other than to someone who understands vegetation indices, because red means bad health and green means good health. So it's okay. It has a good value. But another component to that workflow is they start talking about sensors and drones. So if we were all talking to a grower growing pineapples and or wheat or barley or soy or corn, he or she doesn't really care about the drone we're using. And the word multispectral means nothing to them, right? So we have to start getting into our mindset, what their challenge points are for the specific crop types they're growing, and how aerial imagery can provide value and save time. So that's the real connection point. And where the industry made a giant pivot was when companies like Solvay, Agrimo, and Pix for Fields, when they were able to take those large maps that, the red, yellow, orange, green, blue, they took those large heat maps, plant health maps, and they were able to bring the value down to each plant. So when you have plant level data in the imagery and the data sets, as you will see, it changes the whole conversation. Because what that does from a visual representation is it bridges the communication gap, right? And what I mean by that is, you're standing on one side saying, I got a drone and some sensors and some pictures, it's going to help you. And then when you deliver the pictures, it instantly shows what you're delivering in the value. And then all of the subsequent benefits that the grower can reap from that imagery are pretty obvious. So from my perspective, where the industry made a giant turn, and it was to our value, our benefit down here in the smaller section of the space, was when they were able to convert large plant health maps into plant level data, because that changed the world in terms of how we describe what we're doing, how the software is delivering value, but it also then starts mirroring their use case and their challenges and pain points, right? And what I mean by challenges and pain points, if we're a grower, one of the challenges is if we have even 10 acres of cabbage, is where are the healthy ones? Which ones are good? Which ones are bad? Are they growing properly? Because across the globe and around the world, in a lot of markets, you have market conditions that are associated to different crops, right? And it's typically around size. So, larger heads of cabbage per se will fetch more money on the market. Same with onions and lettuce and celery and so on and so forth. And it also goes by, there's a correlation between the size and the weight, right? So the turning point, when they were able to bring the plant level data, we now opened up a lot of different services that we can now deliver. And what I mean by that is, the first one right here is field-wide plant health maps and or prescription files. I'll show you a couple of examples of those, but the field-wide health map, again, is that giant picture, that color gradient that has value, and it definitely has value for crops that have a closed canopy, right? Because in order for all of this technology to work, the crop type has to align with the technology. And what I mean by that is, if you have a closed canopy, right, like soybeans, once, like after, emergence V1, V2, they're grown into each other. So it's hard to count individual plants. Potatoes, very similar. After a couple of weeks, potatoes they start all growing into each other, so you have a closed canopy. So it's really hard for the software to figure out where one is and where the other is. So in order to deliver plant level data, the technology and the AI driving all those technology platforms has to be able to have high enough resolution imagery where the software can detect the individual plant and it picks out the unique identifier. Then we can start delivering that value down to each plant. But again, even in scenarios where you have a closed crop, or it's like wheat, or a crop like that where there is no individual plant in it, you still provide value because you're giving an early warning indicator to the grower where they should be focusing their efforts. That in and of itself saves a lot of time. And time at the end of the day is all money. So one of the biggest takeaways and one of the biggest values that we're delivering with this imagery is we're increasing their field staff's utilization, because rather than them just endlessly field scouting, they now have a direct purpose and they know exactly where they're going in the field to do whatever it is they need to do. So you're increasing utilization. You're actually providing the grower with a means of reallocating the labor as well. So it's not like they're going to fire their staff, but what they're going to do is they're going to have staff that are a lot more productive, doing things at a much faster rate than they were doing it in the past. The other services we got to start thinking about think of a grower. So if you have a market that's going to buy your product and they're going to give you more money for the bigger ones, that in and of itself means that through the whole harvest, we're going to be focusing our harvest on making sure that crop type hits those sizes to make the best amount of money. So yield estimations. Well, if a drone's flying over the crops and the crop is easily distinguished by individual plants, we can measure that, right? So we can provide farmers with a yield estimation. That, when I show you guys the samples that I'm about to show you, will blow your mind, because it's really impactful. Like, it's not something that they'll save some money later on. They know that day exactly what they need to do in order to fix a problem, right? So it's something that really, really helps. Yield estimation, zonal management is another one too. It provides the ability for a grower to manage their crop in different management protocols. Meaning, let's say they have a field of 5 different types of corn or cabbage. They can actually start managing those individual sections of the field, and they can start pulling information out of that. And from a tracking from year to year, harvest to harvest, that gives them like almost a playbook on, here's what we did here and here's how the result ended up, and it worked out really well. One of the other components to the services that we bring are pre-harvest and post-harvest as well, right? So let's say someone's turning over a crop and they're going to be retilling the field and adding a new crop. Providing irrigation topographical maps, elevation models, being able to help them with stuff like that is also of a value too. So keep in mind, the services that we're talking about that are going to help the farmer as well as allow you guys to get further into the industry have nothing to do with the drone we're using or the sensors we're talking about. In every scenario, the best way to maximize your impact in this industry is to learn what pain points those growers are experiencing with the crops they're growing, and how aerial imagery can provide value to that. Because if we're having those conversations with a grower, the technology is secondary. It becomes a visual story when you're talking to them, asking them questions, and then showing them examples. Would this help? Would that be something that you'd be able to use to reduce X, Y, and Z? And trust me, when you have those conversations, their eyes light up because it just makes sense. So what I'm about to do, Femi, I'm going to slide over to I'm going to share my desktop and actually walk you guys through a couple of data sets, which I think will support a lot of what I've just put on the table, but I think it'll connect the dots and it'll make a lot of sense. So let me share my screen. Present, share my screen, and I'll go entire screen, and there we go. So I just got to wait a couple secs for Femi because there he goes. On his end, he's going to hook it up for me. Awesome. So what we're now looking at right now is just the field of cabbage. So For a minute, I want everyone on the call to pretend that we're all together. We're all part of the same company. So we're FEMI's, crop consulting company. So the grower is our client, and the grower wants us to be able to provide a yield estimation in the beginning of their harvest. So it's June 23rd. It was last week. We flew this and we captured this data. Keep in mind, when you're flying your drone for the different types of services you're offering, it's not set it and forget it on the flight plan. When you're capturing data for plant level data, you want to ensure that you're configuring the drone to capture high resolution imagery, because high resolution imagery is what the AI needs in order to do its thing. So you can't be flying it at 200 feet and flying at 30 kilometers an hour across the field, snapping pictures as you go. When you're flying, capturing for plant level data, and that's counts and yield estimations, you want to fly a little lower, a little slower, and you want your ground sampling distance, to be around 0.5 of an inch per pixel, right? Or at 1 centimeter per pixel. That's a good target. Now, depending on the crop type, sometimes you might have to go a little lower, fly a little lower, a little slower to increase the ground sampling distance. Depends on the crop, the field, if it was a no-till field and there's a lot of debris on it. So again, it's not set it and forget it. Every single time you pull up to a capture, you have to evaluate those things, right? But again, so we're all standing, we captured the data. So now we're about to explain to our grower, here's the information. So what the grower wants from us is that he wants a yield estimation, and he wants to know how many cabbage he has planted, because he knows he planted 120,000. Now the data set didn't align properly during the upload, but we'll be forgiving on that. So what we'll do is we'll say we want to count it right off the bat. So imagine being the farmer, knowing that you planted 120,000 and you now only have 113,000 plants. So you're missing almost 7,000 plants, right? But you also know the diameter. So you know that 67% are trending in the right size direction, but you have 33% that are small, right? So keep in mind, at the end of the season, the supply chain that will take your crop and move it into the supply chain will pay you higher price for the larger heads of cabbage. So the grower wants to make sure that those red ones get into the other column. So this was the report we provided to the farmer back in June. And the farmer says, great, I needed to come back out in September, but a month before my final harvest, because I'm going to harvest this up near the end of October and bring it to market. So we say, sure. So we go back and we capture the data. Let me go to this data set here. Oh, I was clicking on the shared screen and not on my other monitor. I apologize. Okay, so the cabbage have come along nicely, as we can see. Now, what we're asking the software Solvi to do right here is we're asking it to count every one of these heads of cabbage, but more importantly, we're asking it to measure the crown of every head of cabbage, right? Because this is what the farmer is going to get paid for, not the leaves. So let's count. Let's see what we can do. Well, there we go. It did a pretty good job. So again, here's the value. I never mentioned multispectral imagery once. I never mentioned what drone I was using. Every word coming out in this conversation has been about the crop and the grower's need, right? So the grower now knows the grower has about a month before harvest. So the grower knows that all of these 45,000 plants, and he still didn't get the 120,000, but he was able to replant and generate enough to get him close to the 120. So that was value. So right off the bat, if you think about the preceding data set, he only had 116,000, right? Or sorry, 113,000. So he is off to 7,000. So by that data set we captured, he then was able to add another 4,000 heads of cabbage back into the field. So that has value to it. But now analyzing this data set, the grower knows instantly that this area up top is a challenge. And all the yellow in between is a challenge too. So the grower, now this is the weird part about it. The grower, the the uplift in revenue to get a head of cabbage from this one into this one is more than getting from this one to this one. So the farmer is going to focus most of his or her efforts on generating the most amount of revenue. But no matter how it plays out, technology like Solvay, Agrimo, and Pix for Fields, they bring this technology to the table, and they bring this information to the grower's hands. So the grower knows right off the bat, okay, here's where I could apply some different, methodologies of my harvest to increase the red ones to get them into the yellow, and hopefully a couple into the blue in 1 month remaining, and as many of the yellow as I can in. But just when looking at the data set too, like look at this line down here. Like what's going on there? Like that's providing value to the grower as well. So right off the bat, we were able to look at all the plants. We know exactly the diameter of every single head of cabbage. Oops, so we scroll through and it just measures them all. Right? So having that information as a grower is really powerful. So when we're looking at this makes a lot more, it creates a lot bigger of an impression than looking at something like this. Like plant health, again, is good. That in a researcher's hands is wonderful information. And a researcher with an understanding of vegetation indices can apply a lot of great, vegetation indices and work their magic and understand exactly what's going on down in those other lower areas, right? But in production ag, it's good, but it's not really the driving force. What the farmer needs is this. That's what the farmer needs, because that instantly gives the farmer value that they instantly can start working on, right? When they're looking at it from that plant health map, and keep in mind, for 10 years, we've been beating the drum telling farmers that that picture was the best thing that they could ever dream of. And it's not bad in its place. And I have some data sets where I'll show you that it's good. It provides value, but it's hard to sell that. And it's hard for the farmer to really have a massive impact by using that data. Sure, they could cut some corners. They know where to focus some of their field efforts and all that. And that has a lot of value, but it does nothing for yield. It does nothing for counts. It does nothing for replants. So it's a combined effort. Plant health is hugely valuable, right? But it's the way it's displayed. So both technologies work really well. So this is one use case that I wanted to bring to the table. We'll take a look at another use case. This is onions. So with onions, like with a lot of crops like cabbage, they have predefined market conditions, onions based on size. So the grower in this situation, this was their field, right? So it was a big field right down here. They wanted to run a test. They wanted to know if their crop consultant who owns Solvay, so that's like us, we're all standing there on the side with our drone. This farmer here wants to know if the drone service provider could measure the onions once harvested. Because when they harvest onions, they go through the whole field and they pull them all out and they cure on the top for a certain amount of time. And then the packing company comes and the packing company goes up and down the rows, picks up all the onions and gives the farmer a check for everything that they've been able to pull. So keep in mind, the supply chain is based on size. So the grower just wanted to make sure that he was getting paid the appropriate amount for his harvest. So when you look at this, when we go down to the bottom, oops, I'm looking at the wrong one again. So yes, Solvay counted every single onion that was harvested, which is pretty impressive. So right off the bat, the farmer knew that he had 11,000 onions in that one section. And this was a proof of concept, which clearly the proof of concept was a success, and he had the rest of the field flown. And come harvest time, he had the data to ensure that once the packing company picked up all his onions, he knew exactly whether or not the invoice was true. So this is another example of how you can leverage technology to really help your business model go forward. And when I say leverage technology, I always say leverage technology instead of flying a drone, multispectral imagery, capturing data, all those things, because all of those things, those words make sense to us because we love flying drones. We love playing in technology. That makes sense to us, but it doesn't make sense to the grower, right? So we have to make sure that we're speaking the grower's language. So this is another use case which brings a lot of value. Another one, this is a blueberry bush. And this is actually not too far from where I'm calling you from right now. So this is, give you a little North American geography. So this is Washington State. This is Canada, and I'm calling you from right here. That's where I am at, Shawnigan Lake, Canada. So boom, we'll jump over here. Sorry for that, but I thought it was relative. So blueberries, like strawberries, like a lot of other crops, the diameter of the blueberry bush, there's a correlation between the diameter and the amount of berries they'll pull off it. So the blueberry grower hired the drone service provider to come out. He wanted a yield estimation because the drone service provider, when he was talking to the grower, said, hey, look, I can capture some data, and with that data, I can give you a yield estimation because I can measure every one of your plants. I can tell you which plants are healthy, which ones are unhealthy. I can also create some zones in your field to let you know how how all the different zones are trending throughout the season, and you can compare them to the other ones throughout the harvest. So when we scroll in, this is captured in multispectral, so you'll see that you can apply a lot of additional vegetation indices to this data set. Now, I don't think this needed to be captured with multispectral, but if you look at the ground sampling distance, it's not the greatest, but it's not bad. But Solvay has no problems with something like this based on the fact that the plants are so easily distinguished from each other. But I digress here. So when we counted the plants, well, when the crop consultant planted the plants, let me swoosh right here, he wanted to know all of the blueberry bushes that were over 20 inches, because 20 inches was his target size and diameter that he wanted to get all of his blueberry bushes to, because when they're at 20 inches in diameter, he has an understanding of how many berries he's going to be able to get off each bush. So he commissioned the flight. So as you can see, the top field has all of the larger berries, the larger bushes, and the bottom has some of the smaller ones and some really small ones here. But what the pilot did is he wanted to see what the health was on the field. So when he flipped the health on, he noticed that the bottom field was healthy. The top field wasn't that healthy. Long story short, they discovered there was an irrigation issue. So the top field was getting less moisture than the bottom field. But thankfully, the data was captured, and thankfully the drone service provider, instead of looking at the diameter, they looked at the plant health just for giggles. He just wanted to see. But look at the value. So the grower right here, this was his money field, right? Because when we flip over to the diameter, that's the size, that's where all of his bigger plants are. So that's where he's going to make the most amount of revenue. And down here, he's got to put some work in. But when you're looking at it from a health perspective, that's scary. That caused some alarm to the grower, because all of the northern field, which has his largest bushes, is under stress. So they were able to fix the problem, and it saved the harvest. So again, just by simply applying plant level data, that's a completely different story than this right here, because plant level data tells a really functional story. Right here, like, I don't understand that. Like, it looks good, so we can apply all of these different vegetation indices, and we'll just pick any one of them, this one there. And again, like, someone who understands what they're looking at will get information from that. And this is super valuable. But for this guy right here, not so much, right? Whereas when we start applying the plant level data, it really is a turning point. And that's why I said in the PowerPoint, that's the turning point. When companies like Solvay, Agrimo, and Picks for Fields started being able to bring that information down to the individual plant, it was a game changer, because that really ushered in precision ag for the commercial grower, the people that we want to support, not the 10,000 hectare company that we'd never get into. The people we want to support are 1,000 acres below, but traditionally really like 500 acres below. That's where we can really engage and have a lot of positive impact. So again, with a drone and an RGB sensor, you could be delivering this stuff. because this information right here on the data set, we could still pick the health with RGB. It doesn't have to be, because we can use the vary index. That's the same indice that's used on RGB data sets as well. So you can still be impactful, provide a lot of value without, spending $16,000 on a sensor. Now, don't get me wrong. Multispectral is critical in field trials. It's critical in the development of new products, new seeds, new chemicals, and it's critical for large production ag. It really is. But for our end of the industry and for the folks that we're supporting, not so much. Okay, and that's just in my humble opinion. I'm sure there's a million people out there that will say otherwise, but I'm coming at it from the perspective that if I want to sell this service to a grower, I have to speak that grower's language. And at the end of the day, the data has to support what I'm saying. The grower has to be able to look at the data and understand what I'm talking about. If I'm showing the grower a large color gradient and I could tell them it's really powerful, it's powerful, but not to him or I, right? So just to keep in mind. Here's another use case. This is a field of corn. So we all know that spraying with drones is becoming massive. In North America, it's huge. And I will say this, when you're looking at the agricultural space in our end, like the sub 500 acre side of the industry, they're very accustomed to spray. They have tractors that spray, they have, equipment that sprays. So spraying makes sense to a farmer. Now, when you tell a farmer we can spray, but instead of using the tractor or those other things, we can use a drone to spray, and you'll save a lot of money on field treatments because you'll use a fraction of the chemicals. That makes sense. They understand that. So the spraying drones in the industry are bringing analytics in behind it. The reason why is because we can use analytics to show them something like this. Like this is a field of corn. We could count this if we wanted to. Beautiful resolution, it's 0.63 ground sampling distance. That's not bad. Now, the corn is a little mature in its growth cycle. So like Solvay probably could count that. I'm not going to say for sure, but they are growing in together. But I think the AI and the plant AI is pretty good. But the use case here, the farmer didn't want to count the corn. What the farmer wanted was he wanted the weeds counted. So when you're looking at the data set, it tells a much different story now, right? Again, this is very impactful. Farmers instantly understand this, saying, hey, look, here's a whole field, and that's where all your weeds are. You have 22,000 weeds. So we could do some spot spraying, right? So these technologies have that ability to export files that you can plug into your controller and then go spot spray stuff, right? So the technology is where we need it to be. Here's another example. So this is corn. There's two types of counts in the industry, or for this platform specifically. We can count plants and then bring the data onto each plant, and the data is the area, the diameter, or the health of the plant. So we can bring 3 levels of plant level data down to the individual plant, and that provides a lot of value. When we're doing a stand count, we don't need plant level data, because the reason why the farmer's paying for the service is because they just need a plant count. They want to know how many plants germinated and started to emerge, so they know how many to replant. That's all they're looking for. So in a scenario like that, we don't need to engage the plant level data. All we need to do is just put a dot on every single plant. So as you're looking at the data, we counted every single, not head of, every stalk of corn. I lost my train of thought for a sec as to how to call corn. But when you're looking at the data from that perspective, that's a powerful representation for the grower. Because not only does the grower know where he's missing his plants, he knows exactly how many are missing, right? And that's a huge value. If we slide over to potato, same thing. Now, this data set here is probably at the latest portion of the growth cycle before it becomes a closed canopy, right? You can already see like it's starting to close in right here. Another week or so, that would just be one. It would look like a hedge from above. It would look like a bush, right? But they could get it now. So they wanted a stand count. Bing. They got a stand count. So think of if this was your field of potatoes. Not only do you know exactly how many you have almost 320,000, but you know where you have the problem areas, right? So you know exactly where to focus your replanting efforts. So the old methodology was to walk out into the field around here with a hula hoop, throw the hula hoop on the ground and count the emerging plants in that circle, do that in the 3 or 4 other places, and then do the math and extrapolate that right across the field, which works to a certain degree. But what you don't get is you don't get precision. You don't know exactly where to focus your efforts. You don't know that this area here, what else is going on up there that's causing that problem, right? What's happening over here? What's happening over there? Why is this not taking? Is there something wrong with the soil? Again, this is information that if you explain it properly to a grower, they'll instantly understand it, because we're not talking about stuff they don't get. We're not talking about our drone. We're not talking about the camera. We're not talking about the imagery. We're talking about the representation of the data. And that's how they really pull value out of it. And I've had a lot of conversations with growers, and when they see this, they get like the light goes on, right? When I show them a picture like this, not much happens, right? Because this is what they're all used to. For 10 years, this is what we've been telling farmers they have to pay for. And as a farmer, to be honest, it's not bad, but where do I pull the value out of that? So the last one I wanted to show you guys was a hemp field. So this is a big hemp field in California, and they wanted to manage the different areas because they had different strains of hemp growing in the individual sections. So right off the bat, we count them, not a problem. But what emerged from the counts was they have a big issue in these areas because there's something going on with those plants. What was discovered was there was a pest infestation and an irrigation. So it was a double whammy. Had some issues with the irrigation, and they also had a lot of dust mites, like an infestation. So this allowed the grower, because this is 88 acres. That's a big field. So 88 acres, we could pinpoint for them exactly where to go focus. So with a platform like this, you can also apply zonal statistics. So you now know, because each one of these are a different strain of the plant. So they can manage this one right here. They know exactly what the canopy cover is. They know how many plants are in that one section, because with hemp, there's all kinds of regulatory compliance conditions that growers have to maintain because it's a controlled substance. So they have to track their plants from seed to sale. So having a history of how many plants they have and what happened to every single plant is very important for that industry. So technologies like Solvi, Agrimo, Pixar Fields, they can deliver that value. So again, showing a farmer that you can use different sections of the field and manage that differently has value, right? Another data set, which I forgot to show you, was this data set here. The drone service provider wanted to sell his client on that, and he had actually put them in here. He put a lot of them in there, which is probably too much. I would have probably created, maybe 2 or 3 zones up top and maybe, 4 zones down below. But you can create the zones any way you want. So these zones, like I said, like you saw in this other one right here, you can hand draw the zones, you can import the zones, whatever methodology you want of getting that data into this data set, it's up to you. But the value at the end of the day is what the takeaway is, because let's say these zones were set up more the way they should be. You could have each row as a zone. So the grower could know exactly row 15, plant number 5 on row 15 is struggling. That is huge value, right? And that it takes the time required off the table, because what we're providing to farmers really at the end of the day is an easier way to manage their crops. We're just giving them a different bird's eye view that shaves hours, weeks off their time card and allows them to be super productive. So that's all of the data sets I wanted to show you guys. Hopefully, by looking at this and me describing the services that we want to sell, was, connects the dots for everyone on the call, because for me, that is the most important part of advancing our precision ag mission forward to growers. So let me stop this screen. I'll stop sharing that. Oh, hey, that's a big one. And I will share my slides, and I'll wrap up the slides. Femi, if you could bring up the slides, that'd be cool. Right. I don't see Femi on the call with me. I'm just going to stop my cam here for a sec. All right. So I'm not sure where Femi is, but to keep things going, I have a look. I'm looking at all of your questions now. Let me get my camera back on. So we won't waste any time. I'll look at the questions and I'll start going through the questions. Hopefully, Femi will have a chance to jump back on. Okay, so I'm looking at the. Thank you, sir. I'm excited to be here. Awesome. Hello, Emmanuel. Praise it. Okay, I'm looking for questions here right now. Looking. Multispectral powered ag drones. Can they do it? Again, multispectral, any drone with an RGB camera can deliver everything I've shown today on all the, an RGB camera on any drone will deliver the results that you've seen today that I've shared with you. All the data sets, all the cabbage, the onions, the corn, just like an Air 2S could do that. You don't have to have a multispectral camera. Again, multispectral is good, but it has its place in the industry, right? So I think the reason why I belabor that point is I know multispectral is critically important in certain workflows within the agricultural industry. It really is. And it can't be replaced. But for production ag, it has value. It does. But it's not required to deliver a yield estimation. It's not required to give zonal statistics. It's not required to give a plant count. What's required to give a plant count is high resolution imagery, right? And RGB traditionally has higher resolution than multispectral. Thermal, the only company that I know of today that leverages thermal would be Farm Air. And they have a patent on that technology and that algorithm, and it really truly is a unique platform. It's really, really wonderful. Hey, Femi, how's it going? I'm just answering questions. So hopefully that answered the multispectral question. The next one would be plant count. Plant counting is much disruption here, representation of the data. I'm not sure, Elwin, what you mean by that. Oh, wow. It really is disruptive because think of it this way. If you and I were that cabbage grower, how would we count 113,000 heads of cabbage? But more importantly, how would we count them? How would we measure every head of cabbage to know which heads of cabbage were 7 inches or more? So yeah, it is disruptive. Like when Solvay brought plant level data down to the individual plant, it was like it ushered in precision ag for us at this level of the industry, right? Because all the rest of the features in this platform, as well as features in Pix for Fields, and Pix is a powerful platform, Agrimo is a very powerful platform as well. All of those combined, once they started being able to bring the plant level data down to the individual plant, that changed everything. It really changed it. Plant counts. So there's 2 types of plant counts. We have the like mid-season counts, like I showed you on the cabbage when we were doing it for yield estimation and counts. And then you have stand counts. Stand counts are very, very finicky because what you have to do in order to do a stand count is you have to fly super low and like 60, 40 feet, right? So it takes a lot longer. You're changing a lot more batteries. and you're processing a lot of imagery, right? And you have to communicate with the grower, like to the point where, because there's only a certain window, like for some crops before they start growing into each other. Or like take soy. Soy, when it first emerges, is 1, and then it quickly becomes 2, then 5, and then within a week it's all 1. So you have to be able to communicate with the grower. You have to understand the crop type, and that's when you can properly deliver stand counts. So stand counts is it's intricate, but if planned properly and executed at the right time, it's good. So there's plant counts and there's stand counts. Stand counts happen in the beginning of the season, and once a couple of weeks pass, you can't do them anymore because it's already past that time. So plant counts is the way we call it. There's not much more to it other than plant counts. What's the next one? Can the software solely be customized to this? Let me just think about that question for a second. Solely can be customized to suit the users. Yeah, I think so. Like the outputs are all very similar. Like the outputs. What I didn't show you on that platform. Plus, like one thing to keep in mind is I don't want this to be like a presentation or a demo of the Solvi platform, because Agrimo and Pixar Fields, all 3 of those platforms are interchangeable in terms of features and functionality. They all do really great things. And the other component is their outputs. They all produce media-rich, like PDF reports that bring a lot of the stuff that you saw on the screen together. So from my perspective, yeah, Solvi is customized and it can suit your needs. It can suit any needs. You can't change the features or the functionality, but it delivers solid content. For crops like corn, can you have more than 1 year? Good question. The challenge with corn, like with all other crops, they don't form a closed canopy, but they start growing to the point where the unique identifier for every plant is really hard to tease out. So you can count corn for a specific amount of time, and once you've counted, once they grow to the point where they're growing into each other, then it's really hard to do that going forward. So there's other things and other value that we could bring to the table for corn now. The next question I see is from Radu. Hey, Radu, how do you indicate to the farmer the exact coordinates of the area of interest, for example, stress plants? Very good question. Well, number one, there's again, because I didn't want to turn this into a Solvi demo, with this technology, what you can do, when Femi comes back on, I'll get him to, because he has to approve what I'm sharing, right? So I'll show you how to do that with the software, but it's really straightforward.
I'm here. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. Yeah.
Let me go back to my screen for a sec. Go that, go there. Okay, hit me away. There we go. Boom. Okay. I'll use the hemp one. Okay. So I'll turn off the. So with this software, like all of the other platforms have this functionality as well, we capture the data, and then with Solvi, we process accounts. That's why I do enjoy this platform. Number one, I worked for the company. Little hidden disclosure. I worked for Solvi for a year. My role was to help them get established in North America. Wonderful company. Love the whole team. Love. With this software right here, we capture the data, we process the counts, and as we're mocking up the data set before we show the client, we go to the first tab over here and we go down to annotate and measure. This is where we can do anything we want. We could draw a line, I could do this, I could whatever. You could do whatever you want to do. I'm making a lot of mess here and I apologize. But sorry, you can annotate and measure, but what you can do is you can draw areas of interest. And you could plop little things on here and you could put something like possible health issue, bud rot. Look at these areas. So when the grower he has the data, we can share the data with the grower, because all the grower has to do, they don't have to have a paid account within this platform. All they have to do is they have to have a profile in the system, which we would create for them. We then share the data set with the grower. The grower opens up the data set on their phone and they see themselves represented as a blue dot here. as they're walking through the field, the dots moving closer to the areas of interest. So that's what I mean by with this type of technology, we can bring a whole new set of workflows that improve staff utilization, and we can reallocate that labor, right? So what we're doing is we're giving them a shortcut, like look over here. Don't look at the whole field. Here's where you need to focus your time. And that gives them the ability to then go and look at that specific area. So the next question would be, what programming language do you use to input commands? What programming language do you use to input commands or instructions into the software to get? Super easy. This platform, just like Agric, just like Picks for Fields, they're super intuitive and easy to use. So from a language platform, nothing. We could all train our grandmothers to use this software, really. Like, you don't need to know a lot about technology in order to use this platform. It does it all for you. And that's one of the benefits of these types of technologies, right? They can do a lot of stuff that we don't have to know how to do. All we have to know how to do is capture the data the right way and present and discuss the services in the right business language that the grower understands. That's all we need to do. We don't have to know C++. We don't need to know AI algorithms. We don't need to know vegetation indices. All we need to know is just basically how to work the platform itself. And it's all clicks. It's super easy. There's zero coding required. Zero. Okay, the next question is, are these software packages drone? Absolutely, for sure. So with these technologies, you basically capture the data, use your own flight planning apps. You can use a million of them, right? There's a lot of them out there. You capture the data, and then you simply upload the data. So for Solvay, you upload the raw imagery. So if you want to upload the imagery, all you basically do is upload images, and you can either upload individual scouting images, overlapping images, or you can upload a stitched map. It doesn't matter. And all the platforms work the same way. So they've hit the easy button to really take away a lot of the pain points in how people use these types of technologies. Hopefully, Radu, that answered that question. Do we have any other questions? I don't know. Femi, I think we're at the end of the questions, which is good. I will jump back on.
Yeah. So
PowerPoint. Let me just flip over to my slide deck here, because I think I have one wrap-up slide, which I think talks about, hey, does anyone have any questions? Which I think we've already got. So if I go over, oh, yes, this is, do we subscribe to the platform? Good question, very good question. They all have different licensing models, right? So I would encourage everyone just to go take a look at all the different websites. And the software platforms that I really believe in would be Solvay, would be Agric, and Picks for Fields, and Farmair for vineyards. So those 4 technologies each have different licensing models. So again, I'm not selling any of those platforms, so I'll leave that to you guys. But I would go look at their websites, because all of their websites are very descriptive and provide a lot of really solid information in terms of how to purchase them. The reason why I put this slide up here is probably a decent wrap up at this stage of the conversation as well, because what I wanted to do was fight for a better tomorrow today by learning how to present the information we want to present to the growers, right? If we can nail the right talk track down and everyone becomes audible ready with the appropriate talk track for how to position these services to even a grower with 5 acres, right? We can save them a lot of money, and they're not going to be spending a lot of money to get that value as well. So what I think would be another good idea at some point down the road would be to have another webinar on how to price these services. I have a solid methodology, Femi. If you ever want to pick into that, we could do that. But yeah, what I want to do is I want to make sure that everyone understands that, you know, the quicker you learn how to position this and to describe the value, the better it's going to be. And the last slide I wanted to leave up is I scoured the internet. I hit every single, you know, website that tracks the progress of, precision ag and the values and the benefits. And this is what I was able to extract. So from a spraying perspective, precision ag at the very minimum gives you 40% less, right? So you're saving 40% on your chemicals by spraying by air. You're increasing your yields by 30%. And that's a very conservative, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very conservative estimate too, because I know in some examples you can actually be a lot more impactful too. So 95%, that in and of itself, that should be 100%, right? Because the sensors can spot stuff that our eye just doesn't catch, right? Because one thing to keep in mind on the majority of the RGB indices that we're leveraging, those vegetation indices, they're measuring the amount of chlorophyll in the biomass. So plants, like humans, as they become stressed, chlorophyll retreats from the extremities and goes to the core, the stem, which is the life support system of the plant. And as the chlorophyll starts to retreat, we only see it when the tips of the leaves become a different color, right? That's when we go, oh, that's stressed plants. Just think of our plants in our house, right? We only, oh, I should water that plant when I've noticed it's all drooping and the color is starting to go from the leaves. These cameras, because what they're doing is they're measuring the reflectance of each wavelength up and down. So they know that dark colors absorb and light colors reflect. So if it's reflecting more light, they know that there's less chlorophyll in the biomass. So when we're talking about increasing yield, we know exactly where the stressed plants are. So when we're increasing their field efficiency on scouting, it should be 100% because we're pointing them exactly where the issue is. We're not guessing and saying, well, there's 4 places you should look maybe. We're saying, no, here's where you need to look. The last is increase in utilization and labor. To me, hands down, there's more percentages of labor being reallocated based on this type of technology. But again, these are the values that we're bringing to the table. So with that I want to thank everyone for your time, because both Femi and I understand that you guys are busy, and you guys taking an hour and 15 minutes out of your day to listen to me and Femi is important to us. And hopefully we provide value to you guys. So thank you very, very much for attending.
Yeah.
I look forward to joining Femi again. I love this stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it because this is so invaluable, and I must tell you, bringing to life the benefit of digital agriculture, to us, and this is what you have actually shared with us today, guys. I hope you've been able to gain a lot of value today, and yeah, thanks so much for joining.
You're most
And
welcome.
we'll see you the other time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Ciao.